So today I will be refuting the claim that the internet is having a negative effect on the social aspects of our lives. My opponent made three supporting claims. The first one is that the internet is making us less effective interpersonal communicators. The second, the internet creates separation from the real world via smartphones. And the third supporting claim was that we are becoming dependent on the internet. My main counterclaim for this speech will be that the internet allows society to communicate in a more convenient and efficient way. So for the first supporting claim, it was the internet is making us less effective interpersonal communicators. According to dictionary.com, interpersonal communication is defined as an exchange of information between two or more people. This definition does not specify whether this communication has to be face-to-face or it can also be digital. So two examples of digital interpersonal communication are email and texting. Us being college students, I feel that we use email and texting on a day-to-day basis. I know I do. In regards to emailing, my department here, they send out 20 to 30 emails every day, and that's how I'm able to see announcements for registration or club announcements. And also for texting, I live fairly far away from home, and sometimes it's hard for me to go see my mom every day since I live very far from home. But I still make an effort to make her part of my social life via texting if I'm not able to call her on a daily basis. With the evidence that I presented, I can therefore say that the internet is in fact making us better interpersonal communicators. The second supporting claim was that the internet creates separation from the real world with smartphones. One of the pieces of evidence that my opponent used was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. One of the levels is love and belonging. I would like to present two of the other levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. According to the Educational Psychology Interactive, two of the other levels are esteem and self-actualization. Both of these levels can be achieved through the use of the internet. One example of this, specifically for esteem, is social media. Some may argue that social media is not the healthiest way to fulfill that self-esteem need, but it is in fact a way that a lot of the human population uses to fulfill that Maslow hierarchy of need. Another piece of evidence that my opponent used was that a smartphone is basically a supercomputer in your pocket, and it can be a huge distraction. Well, I'd like to refute that claim with the fact that having a supercomputer in your pocket can be a very effective tool, especially in the classroom. According to teachhub.com, 9 out of 10 students surveyed prefer to use technology in the classroom because they feel better prepared for the future. Something else that my opponent mentioned was that society today relies on the internet, which is true. So if students feel comfortable using technology in the classroom, it means that we are making them better prepared for the future, because we can all infer that the internet is not going to go away anytime soon. We are fairly dependent on it, and if we do prepare our children for it in the classroom, if it is with smartphones, then so be it. And also, technology does play an important role in the workforce. So, like I said before, it is important that we do teach students technology at an early age. And also, the internet, specifically smartphones, does provide an easy way to access information, which can be a benefit in the classroom. The third and final supporting claim that my opponent used was that we are becoming dependent on the internet. This supporting claim does not support the main claim that the internet is having a negative effect on our social lives. Just because we are dependent on the internet does not mean that we are incapable of doing things outside of the internet, such as being social with our friends. My opponent also does not explain the correlation between being dependent on the internet and how it affects, how it has a negative effect on our social lives. According to an article on Psychology Today, Dr. Jacinta Francis states that the internet is a marvelous tool for connecting us to people we would never meet. I'd like to use a personal example for this. Before I came here to Cal Poly Pomona the summer before my freshman year, I joined a Facebook page called Cal Poly Pomona Class of 2020. On this page, there were students that were going to be coming to Cal Poly Pomona in the fall that were from all over Southern California, from Northern California, and even from across the United States. I was able to interact with these people on the internet, and I was actually able to meet a good amount of people once I came to Cal Poly Pomona in the fall. Now, if I would have never met these people online, there would have been a fairly good chance that I wouldn't have even met them in person, because a lot of these people had different majors and we would have never had classes together. My opponent also used a personal example, and he said that his friends do not know how to get around without using GPS such as Google Maps. I'd like to refute this. I would like to refute this claim with the fact that with another personal example. I use Waze basically on a daily basis, but and Waze is a form of GPS. But if I did not have access to Waze for some reason, if I was in an area that didn't have signal, I know that personally, I know the difference between north, south, east, and west, and I would be able to get myself out of the situation if I was lost. I believe that my opponent was trying to equate dependence on incapability, but I believe that we are dependent on the internet because it is convenient, but convenience does not equate to incapability. So in conclusion, the evidence presented in this claim speech does not support the main claim. The three counterclaims that I made were that the internet is making us better interpersonal communicators. The internet, specifically smartphones, provides an easy way to access information. And also, dependence on the internet occurs because of convenience, not because of incapability to do these things on our own. Thank you.
All right, structurally everything's good. On the first point, there's not really any evidence that you have here. There's not really a discussion of what the advocate's evidence is. You've got your own personal examples, which I think are okay illustrations about the number of emails that get sent out a day. And the notion about texting your mom, I think, is a good personal illustration of those things. But I don't know that those are the interpersonal communication skills that the advocate's talking about. I don't remember what their evidence is, and there isn't really a specific reference to that. So I think that there is a value to interpersonal communication from the technological communication that's provided by the internet, but whether or not we're talking about the same thing is a little bit uncertain. On the second argument, the desire to have, the supercomputer and this idea of love and belongingness being compared to the Maslow needs of esteem and self-actualization, I'm not exactly sure how that applies to the advocate's argument on this point. I do think I recognize what you're talking about, that this technology can help us achieve some of the things that you're talking about, although you don't really explain how. I'm assuming you're talking about, some kind of validation that people get, whether that's the number of likes they have for a post, or whether it is the number of friends that they have on Facebook, or some other kind of, shares on Twitter or something like that as a form of validation. I think that's probably what you're talking about, but it wasn't very clear. The distraction issue, your argument basically comes down to, there's a value to having access to this material. I don't know that answers the question of whether it is also a distraction. It's like anything that you have in your hand. There might be a value to having the pencil in your hand, but if you're not writing with it, what do people do with it? They bounce it, they spin it, they clean their ears with it, they use it to pick their teeth. It's still a distraction. And again, I don't know that the advocate provided very good evidence to talk about what the impact is on students or anybody else, and your argument is to suggest that it really is enhancing education, but we don't have any data on this. This is really abstract, and so it's a little bit like the first point, where you're kind of depending on sort of hypothetical images of what it is likely to be occurring here. Your third point, I think you explained the lack of relationship to the claim. The relevance argument is basically everything that's going on this particular point. You had a nice piece of evidence that talked about how it helps connect people to others, and a personal example there. I thought that might those might have been more useful on your first point rather than on this particular point. And then the example of the GPS thing, I think, well, if they can use a hypothetical example or talk about their friends, you can talk about your own experience. I know the difference between north, south, east, and west. I thought that was a pretty straightforward example. If the only thing that they have is a hypothetical about their friends getting lost, then your hypothetical seems like it's perfectly reasonable to present in this place. I do think that there is probably some other information that could be developed here. So I felt like you did a good job explaining ideas, challenging the reasoning, presenting some hypotheticals. You could use a little bit more research to support your position, but it was nicely presented. Holy criminy, that took 10 minutes.